Yeah, now I would like to talk about lychee. Yeah, if you can describe what it is and why did you write it in the first place?
When I looked for tools that would help me improve my code, I stumbled across a lot of linters. Linters are tools that go through your code and they help you find unidiomatic patterns. And there are a lot of linters out there for different languages. And no one seemed to have written down all of them in a list. So a while ago, a couple of years ago, I think it was also around 2015, it's been a while, I started to collect all of the linters that I could find.
Yeah, if you go to Matthias Endler GitHub, you can find this awesome website with so many linkers. Yeah, with so many static analyzers and
Linters,
stuff
yeah,
like that.
yeah,
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 linters.
static
Yeah, so
analysis.
yeah,
Yeah. There's a website called analysis-tools.dev if you want to have a look. And these tools have websites, of course, and they have readmes and documentations and so on. And I had listed all of the tools with links on the README file, and they kept breaking from time to time. So I need to go in and fix it, and then I needed to, yeah, create a pull request and change it, and it was really laborious. And at the same time, a lot of people told me that some links were broken and they created issues, and it was a bit of a nightmare to maintain. And that's why I looked for link checkers. I wanted a tool that I could integrate into my code base and it would check the links for me on a regular basis. And it turns out there are a few of such tools, but they were not in good shape. Some of them were extremely slow, others required a runtime. For example, they were written in Ruby and I didn't want to use Ruby for this problem. Or some of them were really decent, but no longer maintained. And so I found one which I really liked. It was called Lish, and Lish is written in Go. And I wanted to use it, but the author said that they didn't want to maintain that anymore. So I was kind of looking for something in Rust because I was pretty passionate about that already. And it turns out there were none or just a few, but they didn't really cover all my use cases. I needed something that would support Markdown files and HTML files, but also websites. And so I wrote my own. Thought, how hard can it be? Give me a weekend. And I recorded an episode of Hello Rust, which used to be a YouTube channel about the Rust programming language. And you can still look it up. And yeah, that was when 2 years ago, I guess, or maybe even 3 by now. And yeah, this tool has grown in functionality. For some reason, people started to use it, and it is integrated in many projects by now. I think maybe 5,000 GitHub repositories, and it is used by many different companies: Google, Microsoft, Amazon. Many companies use it as part of their regular link checking routine for some projects. And that's why the community grew. And yeah, with it grew the maintenance burden and the number of edge cases I need to handle over time.
yeah. Like there's your talk about lychee that people can find on YouTube if they look for Matthias Endler lychee Rust. It's the first that shows, of course. Yeah, it was hilarious, and yeah, we will go through that a bit in this episode as well. Uh, So yeah, I want to add that I'm in the middle of those 5,000 decided repositories that use lychee. I said, well, okay, I will add lychee. I will find maybe one or two broken links. I think I found maybe 20 or 30. I don't remember now. So I like a call to action to the users, to the listeners, integrate lychee into your side projects on GitHub and so on, because you will find so many broken links that you have no idea. And uh, yeah, regarding this, how can people add lychee? How do you suggest your users to add lychee to their projects?
The first step could be to install the Litchi binary and run it from a terminal. This way, you get a feeling for the tool, what it can do, what it cannot do, what sort of false positives it finds, because there are false positives still. It's a very messy world out there with lots of parsing problems and edge cases, and you will definitely encounter issues with lychee as well. But I would say, for the most part, if you're happy with what you get, then the next step could be to fix these links manually, of course. Once you tried it and you are happy with the results, you can integrate it into your repository through a GitHub action. So you set up the Litchi action on GitHub, you integrate it as a GitHub workflow, and then you can set it up as a cron job. I guess the usual interval is to check all the links once per week, as far as I remember, or once per day. I can't remember. Anyway, in any case, it will create an issue whenever it finds a single broken link. It will create an issue for you on the repository, and you will be notified, and you can fix it immediately. And if you find links that are pathologically broken, things that they just never work, or websites that don't allow link checking, there are a couple edge cases, then you can exclude them. You can add a lychee ignore file to your repository and add all of the links that you want to exclude. The same for files. You can exclude paths, you can exclude directories through glob patterns and all of that stuff. And that's pretty much it. There was an idea to build a platform for it as well, a little SaaS service that you can run yourself. If someone is interested in giving it a try, please reach out. You can get access to the repository. You can test it. Right now, I don't have time to test it myself, but I would love to get some feedback. The idea there was, this is helpful if you have more than one repository and you don't want to get issues all the time. Because these things can get annoying at some time. If you have a lot of links and things constantly break, then you get a lot of issues. Of course, you can group them and stuff, but it would be nicer to have a web interface, I would say, where you can search and group and filter. And this is the Litchi service, as I call it. This would be the next step. And for this, I would love to get some contributions. I would love to open source it as well, but I would say the code is not the prettiest. Mm, If there's someone out there who wants to co-maintain it or wants to have a look, I would be delighted to have a chat.
Nice. Yeah, so I didn't know that. Like maybe I don't remember now that the the GitHub action has a way to create issues when it finds uh, broken links. That's interesting. The way I configured it is that it checks on every PR if all the links are correct. Maybe it works because I don't have that many links, but I agree that like probably if you have a big repository with many links, it's better to run it periodically. Yes.
Maybe one more thing that I forgot. There are two other ways to use Litchi. You can use Litchi as a library now.
Hmm.
And there is a Python wrapper by my friend Jörg Botnik, who used it to learn Rust, which is incredible. And so you can use Litchi in Python now, which is incredible. And the other thing is, I would love to have a way to check pull requests. The idea that I had once was, you can create a simple GitHub app and install it in your organization, and it would go and check every pull request. This is partially done. And again, if someone's interested in this, I need more contributors and more maintainers. So I'd be happy to walk you through the code base and see what needs to be done. Maybe if someone has experience with building GitHub apps, that would be a good starting point. And from a user experience perspective, it would be the best of both worlds. You have a very lightweight tool, but you don't have to maintain it yourself because you get notified on a pull request when something breaks. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you check only the files of the PR, or maybe only the links contained in the changes of the PR.
Not right now.
Uh,
Right now, we don't have any checks for pull requests. We check it through a cron job. But of course, if you do it for PRs, then it would be amazing to find the div and only check the changed links. That would be extremely cool. And there were people who did that with Litchi. They have their own sophisticated pipeline, and they run a little diff tool before seems like
Mm.
there are actions for this that give you the file names, and you can pipe that as input into lychee. But it would be cool to automate that such that you don't have to maintain that code anymore. Yeah. On that note, you can also check out the documentation, lychee.cli.rs, because there you can find a couple recipes on how to integrate Lychee for your workflow. There were many creative people that contributed to that, and they came up with their completely own ideas on how to use Lychee, which I never thought about. For example, yesterday I heard of someone that doesn't even use Lychee as a link checker, but only to extract links and rewrite them in different
Mm.
formats. Of course, you can do
Interesting.
that. There's a Lychee minus dump option for this.
Yeah, like yeah, once your tool is out there, people will find like you will get amazed by how much people hack on your tool and so on. Yeah. Uh, so I wanted to ask you, what does the Lychee happy path look? So how in your mind checking a link was in like the weekend that you started working on it?
The happy path, my expectation was most of the web is completely sane and HTML is structured and websites behave in a standardized way. But of course, going in, I already knew that it might have been a bit more romantic than I originally anticipated. But I didn't expect it to be that bad. Um, there are literally edge cases all around the web and even around checking links. And there are so many basic things which are not really handled well or cannot even be handled well in a consistent way. You need edge cases, you need exceptions all over the place because it's literally messy. And this is also fine to some extent because as programmers, we don't appreciate how easy it was for us to start building websites in the past. You can make mistakes, you can forget tags, and you can forget special characters, and the website still somewhat resembles what you had in mind. But of course, looking at it from the other perspective, from someone that has to parse that stuff, it can be extremely difficult as well. The web is extremely forgiving, and to parse websites, you need a browser grade parser. And this is literally what Lychee integrates. It uses the same parser that is in Servo, that might or might not become the future of Firefox. Who knows? But at least parts of Servo, as far as I'm aware, were integrated into Firefox already. And it's kind of a nice engine for parsing HTML because this part is really well done and we rarely get any edge cases from this. And it's reasonably performant as well. Now, I also want to mention another one. By Antitaker, who is also on GitHub. It's called HTML5 GUM. It is a different HTML parser library, a very nice crate, which is stateless and streamable, I would say. It uses way less memory than HTML5 ever from Servo, but it covers the same edge cases and it does so in a really nice way. And we support both engines and we support pull down CMark for markdown parsing and we have Linkify for plain text. That means you can even pipe in PDFs and it will totally find a lot of links from PDFs. It's not going to be perfect, but it will find a lot of cases. And yeah, overall, I would say this was nothing that I could have anticipated how
Mhm.
hard it would be to parse files and parse input. And then also, even just thinking about brokenness, what is a broken link? What does it entail? This was another thing that I wasn't prepared for. And to this day, I mostly see issues where other people use the tool and are moderately happy with it. I only see problems and edge cases all the time.
Yeah,
And I
that's
can tell you
common.
it's tricky.
It's common, yes. So, so you mentioned that you have different ways to parse HTML and Markdown and so on. Are those all loaded in the binary? And so, for example, from the you can choose what you want to use from command line arguments and stuff like that.
Yes, you
Okay.
can pick your HTML5 engine. We only support one Markdown parser simply because there are no other Markdown parsers I'm aware of that are as good as pull down CMark. It's pretty much an industry standard nowadays in the Rust community, and it's done extremely well by Ref Levine. So kudos to that. And for plain text parsing, we are more or less happy with Linkify. But HTML is very special because you want to decide between correctness and performance, and there are different trade-offs. I would say if you need a 100% correct one, there's no such option, but HTML5 ever comes pretty close. But as I said, HTML5 GOM is almost as correct, maybe even more correct by now. Don't uh, judge me on that, but it's definitely more performant, and this is why it's the default. And you can select this through command line arguments, but you can also compile your own version of lychee with different feature flags and pick the engine there. And yeah, I think it's a nice trade-off between being opinionated on one end and letting the users choose their preferences.
Yeah, interesting. So let's say that you parsed all the links from your HTML, Markdown, and so on. How do you check if a link is valid?
In Litchi, you have different stages. The collector collects links from inputs, and the extractor extracts links from inputs. And so in the collector, you actually in the extractor you extract the links. So you take the links and you find them in your documents, and the collector collects all of them from different inputs. Now suddenly you have a stream of links, and now you need to verify one by one if this is valid or not. An experienced developer might already see that this is an inherently parallelizable or yeah concurrently executable problem. And this is exactly how Litchi is also built. Of course, it uses an async framework, Tokyo in this case, and it has an executor which runs all of these links checks concurrently and yeah, in different tasks. So every check is a future, and we check links with request and with the Octocrab library, which is the GitHub wrapper crate. And we do this because GitHub is very stringent and they don't allow you to check too many links through HTML before they block you. And this is why it's very nice to have an API layer with a proper token. And GitHub allows you to do way, way more requests through that. And this is usually why
Oh,
we use a proper API client for it. In any case, through APIs, it's pretty easy to check if a thing is up or not. You just interpret the result that you get from GitHub. But for any normal website, it is very tricky to decide if something is broken or not. Of course, you have a 404, which people usually associate with brokenness, but you have multiple different stages as well, like a 403 or 418, for example, if someone gets the reference. But even if you say everything that is not working is broken, so you say everything that is not a 200 would be brokenness, you would be mistaken because there are things like redirects and there are things like no content and server errors, but they are flaky and authentication issues and so on. Now, you can have a pretty standardized rule set, but no matter what you come up with, people will also find counterexamples of things that are not covered by your cases, by your logic. And this is why in Litchi you can define what is an error and what is not based on the status code right now. Maybe there will be more sophisticated checks in the future. Maybe like things where you can script an outcome with WebAssembly, for example. That would be extremely cool too. But so far, you can only check whether something is up or down based on the status code and based on the method that you use. It can be a get or a post request or a put request. And you also have the possibility to add additional authentication to circumvent authentication issues.
Okay.
with basic auth, for example.
I didn't get how do you want to use WebAssembly?
If you think about it, it would be really cool if Lychee could interpret JavaScript. Right now, we don't have a JavaScript engine. It means only what we get from the server as static HTML is something that we can check and parse. But the web nowadays is also based on JavaScript, and you should be able to execute it at some point. Now, JavaScript itself is something that maybe you don't want to execute with a lot of permissions on your local machine. This is what browsers are for, and it's like a sandbox. And it would be nice to have such a sandbox for the JavaScript engine. And this is where WebAssembly comes in. Technically, you could build a system which takes your website, runs it in a sandbox like JS DOM, renders the page, and then returns the rendered HTML so that you can extract the links. That will be one use case for WebAssembly. Another use case for WebAssembly would be sophisticated scripting for redirects. For example, you check internal links and you know that there's a certain pattern that maps to a different internal URL. And you can do that with a simple little script, and you can put that into WebAssembly. That means for every outgoing request, you can rewrite the request however you like, and then return back the request that should be handled for link checking. And Litchi will do the rest and do the extraction and so on from the page that you redirected to. And the same for the responses. You want to do various modifications on the responses. And I think WebAssembly is a really nice use case for customizability, not only for server code, but also for CLI tools.
Yeah, like I didn't think that JavaScript in theory, yeah, you're right. It can edit the HTML by, for example, pushing other links and you don't see them. So in theory, you can run JavaScript inside the sandbox environment, render the HTML, and then read the links from there, right? Did I understand correctly?
For example, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So you mentioned that, uh, like, you can of course check all the links in parallel, but I wonder if, like, probably websites return an HTTP status code 429 after a while because you're sending them too many requests. Is that something you experience in Lychee, and do you have a way to avoid it?
429s are probably one of the most common issues with link checking at scale. Litchi is no exception. Websites don't like if you crawl them, but if you check links and only check availability, it feels like crawling to them because even though we don't parse the website body and only the headers by default, it still feels like almost like an attack to them. And they kind of want to block it off after a while. We see that a lot with very popular pages, but even the non popular ones sometimes put you into um, bot detection protection mechanisms, or like put your IP into a blocked list or something like that. And in order to avoid that, you want to make sure that you don't overload the servers and you are a nice citizen of the web. It sounds very easy. You just respect the rate limit headers, but it turns out rate limit headers are not really common outside of APIs. And the only thing that you can do then is be very gentle with servers. Maybe you start with a single link and then you ramp up and you go and maybe make a few more checks, and eventually you notice where the sweet spot is and you don't send too many requests, but at the same time you're reasonably performant. And this is a very tricky task. There are algorithms for this, and some of them are very well known, like the token bucket algorithm, which allows you to do a regular stream of requests. You can think of it this way: you have a bucket and you have a couple coins in there. And every time you make a request, you take a coin out. And if there's no more coin in the bucket, you have to wait until there's another coin in the bucket. and the coins get refilled on a frequent basis. Say you get one coin every 10 seconds. That means this is your maximum rate of requests. And this way, you can have a nice burst in the beginning where you can have multiple requests. And then, after you exhausted these requests, you wait until you can do the next one. This is a very interesting algorithm that we try to include now. And we're working on better rate limiting and being better citizens of the web. It's not necessarily easy. We managed to DOS a few sites from time to time because we kind of overloaded them. And yeah, it's life. It's fair. So we're trying to be good here, and we're still looking for good algorithms and good solutions. We even wrote a parser for those rate limit headers, which you can use for other projects as well. And these are one of the few steps that we're trying, and we're still experimenting with this. Yeah, we didn't expect that it would even become such a successful tool. After all, it's still a side project.
Yeah, but yeah, it's very useful. And like in your talk, you show crazy things that website can do. Like for example, probably my favorite was LinkedIn that returns 999 status code. What are your favorite things that website do when trying to check links?
Another one that I like is YouTube. Even though the YouTube link might be leading nowhere and the video was taken offline a long time ago, YouTube will still happily return a 200 status code, and in the HTML body it will not have a video link. And the way around it is something that was contributed by a user that used to write their own link checker, and they said the only way they found to circumvent it is to check the thumbnail of the video instead of the video itself. I think this is brilliant because you don't need a lot of resources. You just rewrite the URL to something else and the check would just work. But of course, these things are brittle, so they can break over time. Twitter is a very notorious case where it has gotten worse and worse to check Twitter, up to a point where we cannot check it anymore, even to the best of our um, abilities. The only way to do it for sure would be to use JavaScript for it. But as I said, we don't have JavaScript support right now. But that would be a really nice use case that I would like to see fixed, and then be able to parse Twitter once more. Apart from that, these are the main ones that are huge, and a lot of people use them, of course. The one that is a bit more saddening because it taps into public infrastructure and things that should never break is DOI links. They are things that you can put into research papers and usually are maintained by universities. And the idea is that they should never fail and should always resolve to the original resource, which is vital because your entire research is based on that. But even these links, as sad as it is, break from time to time. And we have a lot of breakage around these tools because a lot of people use lychee for this specific use case in research and academia. And this is certainly something that we want to support, but we don't have the bandwidth to do so. That's why I'm really happy that one user took on this challenge and is now going to all of the different entities that maintain DOI links and tells them about the breakage of their infrastructure. It's just not a really thankful task, but overall, this will make the web a better place. And also, just real quick, shout out to archive.org. They do an amazing job. If we as developers could do one thing to improve infrastructure or the future in general, I know, big words now, but I really believe that we should all collectively back up more and preserve some parts of the internet more. We have the skills. We can go and take snapshots. We can extract them and compress them and put them somewhere. Because in the future, this will be incredibly valuable. Even if you only do it for your own resources and you put that into a tarball and put it on GitHub, or maybe not GitHub, but somewhere else where there's a replication outside of bigger platforms. That's amazing. More people should do that.
Yeah, like I like that Lychee is a community effort in a way. So, for example, that user you mentioned that he found out how to find if a YouTube link is broken by checking the thumbnail, or this other user that is uh, like bothering university and stuff like that. And like you mentioned some features you want to add to Lychee, for example, the service, the GitHub app. Is there something more, some more like call to actions for the community you have?
What I would love to see is people using it for different use cases, things that I haven't thought about. Lychee is just an engine, so you can take the library and then do anything with links. It's very generic. It will help you find links in anything, and it can even be used in a streaming manner. I don't know why you should do that necessarily, but maybe, for example, you could think of some sort of service, a web worker in Cloudflare that you can use to extract links from documents, and you don't have to run it on the CLI. You can maybe have a website where you drag and drop a document and it would extract the links for you. That would be a cool thing, and it could run as a worker, for example. These are things that are outside of the Lychee core, but they are incredibly valuable if someone wants to maintain that stuff. For example, there are a lot of ebooks out there, and people publish them on Amazon, and Amazon actually discourages broken links. They penalize you if there are too many broken links in your ebooks, in your EPUB documents. Now, a publisher would have to go and check all of the links manually before publication because it's such a vital step of the process. Now, I'm aware that links deprecate over time, but at least at the moment where you publish a book, the links should work. And if you have a tool which you could use, a web app, for example, where you drag and drop your file and it would show you all of the extracted links and check if they were working or not, that would be really cool. It would be helpful. And you can even build it in such a way that it's completely client side. It doesn't even need to be uploaded anywhere because you can run it on WebAssembly in your client, which is really nice. I think this is one thing I really love about Rust, this connection to WebAssembly and that you can potentially run it anywhere. This has so much potential, and there are so many things like this that people can try. And maybe this is one wish that I have for the future of this project, to see more such use cases, to build a stronger ecosystem around the core.
Nice, nice. And yeah, like I think that for Rust is like the favorite language is the favorite language for developers that work with WebAssembly and stuff like that. And yeah, it's a great use case. I see many web developers that want to learn Rust, and they use WebAssembly as an excuse to learn it. Yes. And so in your talk, staying on the same topic, like in your talk, you shared that many company use Lychee in their CI, but like they rarely give sponsor you on GitHub. And yeah, call to action uh, for the listeners: if you use Lychee and you enjoy it, you should consider sponsoring Matthias on GitHub. So my question is, do you have any plans to monetize Lychee? Maybe using some of the WebAssembly capabilities and stuff like that.
Yeah, to your first part, it is a huge problem that companies don't sponsor things that they depend on. If Python, for example, didn't exist when Google started in 98 or 97, then yeah, maybe they would have a way harder time to build a search engine because yeah, there were existing tools that they could use for free even as students. They were, I guess, doctoral, like they did a PhD, right, in Stanford. But anyway, they were still short on money and they could start easily with such tools, but they never supported Python or the community, as far as I know. But maybe that's not entirely true, because at least they hired the inventor of Python for a while, but I wouldn't count it as sponsoring necessarily. But I guess either either way, they could do even more with sponsoring in different projects and really go into these communities and appreciate their work. Now, Lychee is a tiny tool. Maybe it's not critical infrastructure, but certainly a thing that is critical infrastructure is the web itself. And it's so fragile. And it is the very thing that made these companies big that they just try to destroy right now. This is how it feels from an outsider's perspective, because they take the web and they put it behind walled gardens. You need a user login, and it's not indexable, or you need JavaScript to read plain text. And all of these things are done to play the gatekeeper and protect your intellectual property, quote unquote, which mostly is generated by users anyway. And this makes it harder for tools like Litchi. It's kind of controversial or paradox even, because they use a tool which they kind of actively try to defend by blocking requests on their own properties. And yeah, it is what it is. In any case, I would hope for more companies that understand that open source is a core part of the web and their business model. Apart from that, you can struggle with that and you can complain all day, but it's not going to solve the problem. We, as open source maintainers, need to find ways to make businesses pay. And usually, businesses pay for things that they need and they cannot get elsewhere, or they don't want to build. One of such things that companies like Elasticsearch were successfully doing in the past is support for enterprise features like login authentication and audit logs and proxying and SLAs and all of that stuff that businesses care about. Invoices is one of them, and having a contact person, and first level support in 24 hours and stuff like that. I might think about such endeavors. There might be plugins in the future which will be open source, but they might also be proprietary, or they might be under a different license for enterprises. For example, one thing that companies seem to use with Litchi is some way to check internal infrastructure. But a lot of these things are behind authentication. You have ADFS, and maybe you need to authenticate first before you can access a page. And this can be a very valuable thing if it was a plugin. This is another area where WebAssembly could come in, because you could build, for example, a plugin that would only do very specific business logic for one customer, and you could maintain that for them, and also maybe sell the same plugin to other companies as well. And so this would be one way to go about it. The other one that I thought about would be, who really needs a link checker at scale? And the answer that I came up with was people that have a lot of documentation, people that work in businesses. For example, they build tools for developers, and they want to make sure that the documentation is always up to date and correct, because this is part of user experience too. And they might be willing to pay for a hosted service. Now, the idea would be, you have a platform and Litchi would go and check your website and then have a dashboard and show you the broken links. But if such a thing really was extremely valuable to them, chances are they would have built something like that before and by themselves. So it's still just a pet theory that I have, that potentially someone might pay for it. But the way I see it right now is twofold. One, it's okay if it stays like this and if it's just a side project that I maintain on the side. And on top of that, I think WebAssembly or a plugin system in general will enable a lot of cases that I haven't thought about yet, and that can make it a platform at some point. I'm very happy that initially we built it such that it is a library and a binary, and you can kind of separate it. This was one goal, which is similar to how curl looks like internally. Curl is split into libcurl, the library, and curl, the binary. And this way you can integrate libcurl into literally anything. And if you need support, who else should you get it from except from the maintainers, from the authors of the tool itself? And this is a really, really good business model, I would say.
This video was extracted from the Rust Ship podcast. You can find the full episode on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast client. If you liked this video and you want to learn more about Rust, subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow me on LinkedIn, X, and Mastodon. You can also share it with your colleagues if you think they would like it. Bye!